sell those cards and we get the discounts.
Yeah. Yeah. But I was talking to John because, he said, yes, it's a lot of money.
I have 6 o'clock, and I'd like to call this regularly scheduled meeting of the EVIT Governing Board to order and ask Ms. Doolin to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Standing.
Absolutely.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
Which stands
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
That brings us to agenda item 3, approval of the minutes of the August 23rd meeting. Do I have a motion?
I move to accept the minutes.
I'll second.
Is there any discussion? Hearing none, Ms. Boggs, will you call for the vote? Ms. Boggs, are you able to call for the vote?
I am. I don't know if I have everybody. I have Lane, Fleetum, Hart, Watkins, Hobson, and myself. Is that correct? Isn't there anybody else in there?
Nope, that's it.
That's it.
Okay. Lane,
Aye.
Fleetum,
Aye.
Hart,
Aye.
Boggs is an aye.
Watkins,
Aye.
Hobson,
Aye.
and Boggs is an aye.
Motion carried. That brings us to item 4, call to the public. Dr. Wilson?
I do not believe we have a call to the public, Mr. Watkins.
Thank you. That brings us to the consent agenda, item 5. All items will be considered with one vote unless someone requests otherwise. Are there any requests? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
I move that we approve the consent agenda items A through J.
I'll second.
Is there any discussion? No? Ms. Boggs, will you call for the vote?
Yes. Lane,
Aye.
Fleetum,
Aye.
Hart,
Aye.
Watkins,
Aye.
Hobson,
Aye.
and Boggs is an aye.
Motion carried. That brings us to item number 6, personnel. Do I have a motion?
I'll move that we approve the personnel.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion? Ms. Boggs, will you call for the vote?
Lane,
Aye.
Fleetum,
Aye.
Hart,
Aye.
Watkins,
Aye.
Hobson,
Aye.
and Boggs is an aye.
Motion carried. That brings us to item number 7, an information and discussion item, and I believe Kevin Colville is slated to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Watkins. At our last meeting, we talked about amending policy BEDH so that people who can't attend in person can still do a call to the public. So we've proposed amendment to BEDH that provides for that opportunity. Basically, people would have to email a request to speak to Tammy, our executive administrator, prior to the meeting, and then we would, that would include their phone number, and we would just call them from this meeting so they have an opportunity to speak. And part of that is we amended the exhibit, the request form to reflect that capability. And that's it.
Kevin, I have a question. One of these near the end, the special exhibit ones, I'm trying to find the exact one, has what I think is a mistake.
Okay.
It's the second exhibit one under BEDH.
Mm-hmm.
I had it earmarked. Dang it, now I don't see it. Oh, here it is. It's the one that's the request to address the governing board.
Okay,
Down there, about in the middle, above the regular meeting of the board date, it says, "I will not attend the meeting." I think it should be, "I will not be able to attend," or "I will not be attending," one or the other.
you are correct, and I'm embarrassed, I would be embarrassed to tell you how many people proofread this before I got here. I will make that change, and since it's an exhibit and doesn't require board approval, it will not require a new first read at the next meeting, so I'll make that change for the next meeting.
My English teacher would be proud of me. That brings us to item number 8, I believe. Yes, an action items. A, Dr. Wilson, board vacancy.
Mr. President, members of the governing board, as you are aware, we have a vacancy on the board as Mrs. Doolin has joined the administrative team. We work with the county superintendent in the process for filling that vacancy. The process is we post that position and notify of the vacancy. Then individuals are asked to submit letters of interest to us, which are then forwarded to you. The hope would be that you all would come with a recommendation that we could forward to Superintendent Watson, and that he then takes the opportunity to not only interview the individuals that have submitted letters of interest to us, but potentially individuals that went straight to the county superintendent's office. And ultimately, he'll make the determination. He's not obligated to follow your recommendation, but in working with him in years past, he's very much willing to consider your recommendation. So you have in front of you the letter of interest to the 3 individuals, and it is your opportunity to have discussion and make a recommendation for the candidate that you would like, and we would forward that name to Superintendent Watson.
Thank you. I would like to offer this time to the board to discuss any of the potential board members' recommendations.
Well, I would suggest that we ratify Mrs. C. and Luke, who's actually present with us today, as our
I didn't hear who you said.
Mrs. Luke.
Oh,
C.
yes.
and Luke, it's on. I'm just talking to this guy. That's my opinion, for several good reasons.
Is there anyone else? At this time,
I
then,
too support C and Luke.
I would also support, but
So,
then I'll call for
well,
for a motion.
okay, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Watkins. I apologize.
At this time, do I hear a motion?
I'll move that the board ratify the recommendation to the county superintendent of schools to have Mrs. C. and Luke fulfill the vacancy left by Mrs. Doolin.
Is there a second?
I will second that.
Miss, is there any further discussion? Ms. Boggs, will you call for the vote?
Lane,
Aye.
Leadham,
Aye.
Hart,
Aye.
Watkins,
Aye.
Hobson,
Aye.
and Boggs is an aye.
Motion carried. That brings us to 8B, qualified evaluators for the school year 21-22. Do I have a motion?
I'll move that we approve the list of qualified evaluators as presented.
I'll second.
Is there any discussion? Hearing none, Ms. Boggs, will you call for the vote?
Lane,
Aye.
Leadham,
Aye.
Hart,
Aye.
Watkins,
Aye.
Hobson,
Aye.
and Boggs says aye.
Motion carried. That brings us to 8C, the student school calendar for year 23-24. Dr. Wilson?
Mr. President, members of the governing board, one of our goals organizationally is to become much more efficient and effective in how we operationalize our organization. And in order to do that, we need to be more proactive than we have been in years past in terms of setting our school calendars, because in order to begin registration, in order to begin uploading, we have to have our school calendar set. It's not unheard of for districts to have multi-year calendars established so that we and our parents and community can have kind of a heads up on when our school will be starting, when our breaks will be. We're unique, obviously, because we service, all the schools in the East Valley. And so the idea that we would have a calendar that matches and aligns with every one of our school districts is just not reasonable. So what we do is we go and look at some of the larger sending districts and see what their calendars are and try to mirror ours to those the best we can. And so that's what we've done for the recommendations to you, to have a recommendation for two school year calendars mirrored to the districts that have the larger districts that also have those 2-year calendars. Again, this will allow us to not only communicate to our employees, our parents, our community, but also allow us to be much more proactive in the registration process for each of the subsequent years.
Thank you.
So I have a question, Dr. Wilson. So EVIT has, we're planning on starting August 1st, where some of the sending districts aren't starting till the 3rd, the 4th, the 9th, that kind of stuff. I'm just curious, with us being, a lot of these kids are starting at their sending schools and then coming here, would it behoove us to start maybe a week later just to give these kids a chance as opposed to trying to start EVIT before their regular school starts?
So I think the challenge, that's a fair point. I think the challenge with it is that when we look at our sending districts, you have some of those like Chandler and Apache Junction, and I think even at J.L. Combs is moving towards a year-round calendar. So they're going to start before we even start. When you look at the Mesas, the Gilberts, the Scottsdales, I believe they're right within that range. So I think our challenge is how can we get a calendar that is as close to the start time and end time as the majority of our campuses, while at the same time recognizing that it's not going to be pure. There's going to be a disconnect no matter where we started, and that's been the challenge with us all along. One of the things we've said to our sending districts and to our students is that if we haven't started yet and you have, then couple weeks down the road we're going to get started. If we've started and you haven't, you're more than welcome to come to us, and we have sending districts that actually have done that. That even if their school district hasn't started, they've sent the buses to EVIT. But if that's not feasible for whatever reason, then those students won't be held responsible for those days in terms of their attendance. Then we'll work to try to get them caught up on the academics that might have been taught during that period of time that they weren't here. But it is a challenge. There isn't going to be, no matter what schedule we select, there isn't going to be a fit that works with all of our sending districts. And so we strive to get the best fit for the majority of the students that we serve, which tends to be from the larger school districts.
So, Dr. Wilson, I have a question, and pardon my ignorance here. So Chandler, for instance, say first day of school is July 19th, which is 2 weeks before we start. So what happens to the student in the sending district of Chandler that'll be 2 weeks behind the program here? I think you may have mentioned it here. I mean, 2 weeks ahead.
So I think the challenge, if I'm understanding the question correctly, I think the challenge with Chandler is they start 2 weeks before we do.
Right.
And so we're not in session for those 2 weeks that those students are actually in school at Chandler.
Right.
So those students don't have EVIT the first 2 weeks of their school year. And so what winds up happening when we start is then we pick them up.
Okay.
Where sometimes becomes a bit of a hiccup for those students is that when they go on their intersession, we don't.
Right.
And so, the challenge is how do we accommodate the students in that setting? And what we tell the students is exactly what I said that with some of our other districts that start a bit later, that we would love for them to be here. And most of them, quite honestly, do come, and their sending districts will transport. But if they can't, for whatever reason, then it's a homeschool activity excuse that doesn't require their attendance.
And excuse me for not reading the next column, so I apologize. Thank you. I get it now. So, but we will help the kids that don't really align with us. We'll help them make sure that they're up when we get into the fall, winter break, spring breaks, all those.
Yeah, the
Or the
student-
young, I say, everybody's a kid when you're my age, so I apologize, so.
No, our goal, I mean, this is a challenge that we face every year that, you know, either we haven't started yet and some have, and then that creates hiccups during the school year because they have longer fall breaks, longer spring breaks, and so we work with them to accommodate them. Or we start and then our sending districts haven't started yet, so we work to get those students caught up, or in many cases, those students start with us before they start at their sending high school. I think on the back end is where it becomes a bit of a challenge too, because all of our sending districts, you know, when they finish, they graduate, and so our seniors, we want to try to be able to get them completed as close as we possibly can in order to allow them to have the credits earned here that goes towards their graduation.
So the reason, and I apologize for making this longer, but being new to the board, with approving all these transportation waivers that we get inundated with because schools can't seem to figure out how to get the transportation in place, I'm just curious if it wouldn't be more beneficial to wait and let these schools kind of get on their feet before we actually started, as opposed to, in the past, what's the history of these guys being able to provide transportation prior to their school starting?
So I will give our sending districts credit that there typically hasn't been issues with them providing transportation before the school year starts. In fact, they've actually been really good about that. Where we wind up having the issue with the transportation is often when their school year starts, and then all of a sudden their routes are having to run their junior high, their high school, as well as EVIT. That's where the disconnect sometimes happens. I think you bring up a very valid concern as it relates to the transportation. I don't know that it's so much, from my perspective, in context with the school calendars, as it is with us and you as a governing board having the clear expectation and understanding, as you did this year, that you may grant a waiver 1 year, but it's not a multi-year waiver, and therefore we may hit a point in time in which either the sending districts have accommodated and got the transportation figured out, or they're in violation of the IGA. We still are in the process of having to sit with the sending districts now until the end of the school year to have new IGAs, and transportation is certainly going to be an aspect of that. But I think you raise a fair question. I just don't know that I just don't know us starting later will change their issue with transportation, because it's not been an issue for them transporting for students that have yet to start and we've already started. If that makes sense.
So, Dr. Wilson, so this list that we have here with all the school districts here, it appears that there's only one Fountain Hills that has more than a day or two. Mm-hmm. You know, that's a full week, right? 8 days, 9. So that would be the one that would be just a little bit. Tempe starts on the 4th and we start on the 1st, so, yeah. Okay.
And there
Thank
is
you.
no, I mean, like I said, I would love if we, as a East Valley, could all have the same, but that's just never gonna happen.
Sure.
Unfortunately.
No. Any further questions? Do I have a motion?
I move that we approve the calendars as presented.
I'll second.
Any discussion? Ms. Boggs, will you call for the vote?
Yes. Lane,
Aye.
Freedom,
Aye.
Hart,
Aye.
Watkins,
Aye.
Hobson,
Aye.
and Boggs is an aye.
Motion carried. That brings us to 8D, high school class fees for the year 22-23. Do I have a motion?
Also move.
Second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, Ms. Boggs, will you call for the vote?
Lane,
Aye.
Freedom,
Aye.
Hart,
Aye.
Watkins,
Aye.
Hobson,
Aye.
and Boggs is an aye.
Motion carried. That brings us to 8E, adult ed tuition and fees for the year 22-23. Do I have a motion?
I'll move that we approve the adult education fees.
Is there a second? I'll second. Okay. Any discussion? Ms. Boggs, will you call for the vote?
Lane,
Aye.
Leadham,
Aye.
Hart,
Aye.
Watkins,
Aye.
Hobson,
Aye.
Boggs is an aye.
Motion carried. That brings us to 8F, out-of-boundary high school students and adult ed blended program tuition for the year 22-23. Is there a motion?
Also move.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Yeah, I have a couple questions. Can you help me, or anyone else, define out of boundary height, I'm assuming high school student and adult ed? So even if they're out of boundaries, if they're Arizona state residents, then wouldn't they be eligible for ADM for high school age kids?
So it's my understanding, and if I err, Director of Legal Services will catch it, but it's my understanding that because of the CTED and the dollars associated with the tax rate for the CTED, if you live out of boundary from the CTED, you aren't automatically given the opportunity to for us to capture the ADM. You are if you attend, am I saying this right? You are if you attend one of our partnering districts, but you're not if you attend a charter school or a homeschooled individual and you just want to attend us versus a Cabot or a Westmac, then we're obligated to charge a tuition or else it'd be gift of public funds.
Uh-huh. Okay.
So
Any further?
yeah, I was
Go
going to
ahead.
ask a question too. So when we're looking at the difference, is that what the student or the family of the student would be responsible for? Or are they responsible for that full tuition?
For the full tuition. So the difference and the rationale behind the increase in the tuition is that initially when it was established, it was based on the ADM generated for participating students, and that ADM generation has gone up over the years, and we haven't adjusted our tuition fee. So that amount reflects actually what now the ADM capture would be if it was a student that we could upload to the state. So they're entitled, I mean, that dollar amount is the dollar amount the family's responsible for, and you see the increase, and the increase is borne by the ADM actually going up from the state for students that could generate ADM.
How many students fall in this category currently?
On the blended is a good number. On the tuition out, I don't know, what would you guess? I would say less than 50 tuitioned out, and
Where are they coming from?
so
Roughly.
so some of them will, for example, we have some that don't live in Maricopa County that attend a charter school in Maricopa County, and because the charter school, we're not allowed by statute to participate without the tuition. So we have a handful of the charter schools, but the students live outside the Maricopa County. So some live in Pinell, some live in Phoenix. We have some individuals who their family lives in Phoenix, but parents work here and send the student to a charter school, and they attend. And so they're coming largely from Pinell, and then outside of EVIT's boundaries over in Phoenix.
What do you think the motivation for those people to do that? Lack of opportunity in their Pinell County, or what about in Phoenix?
So I think they're choosing to attend a charter school. I wouldn't want to comment on that because I don't know. I think the idea that they would want to participate in a CTED, and especially one like ours, in and of itself, I think carries with it an opportunity. It's just unfortunate that the statute reads the way that it is, because those individuals outside of the attendance area that go to a charter school within the attendance area have to pay the tuition.
So, and again, I apologize for slowing this down again, but as of 2 years ago, Cave Creek wasn't affiliated with EVIT. And so if those kids wanted to come here, or Westmac, this was the bill that they paid. As of now, are there any other districts for public schools that aren't affiliated with either Westmac or EVIT? There are.
Yeah, Phoenix Union.
Phoenix Union is not affiliated.
Yeah.
And so
With
these
either.
kids would be responsible for $4,000 if they chose to attend here.
Correct.
But But the Phoenix Union has Metro Tech, right?
So Phoenix Union receives Perkins funds, which is the federal funding for CTE. They don't receive the state funding because they haven't joined a CTED. And so part of the value of joining the CTED is your community agrees to increase a nickel tax on their property value per $100,000 to generate the funding for CTED. Phoenix Union doesn't do that. So they get the Perkins funding for CTED. Phoenix Union also has quite a bit of revenue and desegregation dollars that they use to offset it as well.
So there's opportunities for them to recoup these costs, the families.
So if I'm a family that is tuitioning into here, there really isn't much of an opportunity to recoup the cost, other than the decision they made. They went into it understanding that this was the opportunity. If they lived in Phoenix Union, they could attend the programming in Phoenix Union. If they lived in Peoria, they could attend Westmac. So there's other opportunities outside of here. If they're in Pinell County, they can attend Cabot. If they choose to go here and they meet that criteria that's not funded, then we're obligated to charge the tuition. So they have other opportunities, but not necessarily opportunities to get that revenue back.
How does that fall with the voucher program that you're throwing
So
out there?
that's the other.
That muddy up the water? a
Yeah,
little bit?
that's, I'm glad you mentioned that. That's the other piece to it. We have several students actually that are in private schools that are recipients of the voucher, the STOs. And so because those families receive money from the state for tuition payments to their school, they also then are obligated with that funding from the voucher to pay the tuition for us. So we don't upload those students. So any of the students that are on the vouchers or that we're charging tuition to, we obviously don't upload to the state for funding. And the vouchers would be part of those.
Okay.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, Ms. Boggs, will you call for the vote?
Yes. Lane,
Aye.
Leadham,
Aye.
Hart,
Aye.
Watkins,
Aye.
Hobson,
Aye.
and Boggs is an aye.
Motion carried. That brings us to 8G, proposed budget revisions for years 21, 22. And I believe Ms. Pettis is scheduled to speak. Edith?
Yes, good evening, board members, board president. Just a quick update on the revisions that you have in front of you. The budget is the first of probably at least one more or maybe two possibly more depending on changes that we have to our ADM. But this particular budget is being revised and it impacts the base level increases. It impacts our M&O or unrestricted capital, our classroom site fund, as well as our federal and state projects. The main thing, as you may recall, when you adopted the budget, our base level support that was utilized was prior year because the legislative session had not ended and the budget had not been approved for this year. So we estimated those amounts. This is reflective of the base level that was approved. And overall, you see an impact of a $2 million increase to our budget, both in the base level amount for the ADM as well as the district additional assistance that is the additional funds that are for our capital. When we look at the specific M&O project expenditures, I'll also like to just point out that when we do the budget adoption, we estimate on the prior year estimated expenses, and in that budget proposal, we include an estimated carry forward. Now that the encumbrance period has ended, this budget revision includes all actual year-to-date expenses. So that's why the net in the increase to the M&O budget is only about $387,000. Unrestricted capital outlay fund, it's a decrease compared to what we estimated, and it's not that we're any lesser funds. It's just that, again, we estimated during budget adoption what the expenses were, and given that we have a major construction project in place, there were additional expenses that were actually paid through the end of June 30th, as opposed to what we had estimated. Classroom site fund, this fund is associated, it's budgeted based on prior year ADM. When we did the budget adoption, we had an ADM amount. As you may recall, our overall budget ADM includes all of the satellite district ADM, so there was a revision in that, and that's why you see that change. And we're receiving an additional $632,000. Federal and state projects, the main revision here is that we received an additional almost $6 million through the Education Plus Up funds. This is through the American Rescue Act. The states received $163 million, and the allocation to EVIT was 5.9. We're still working with the administrative team as to how those dollars will be allocated. We have 2 years to spend those funds, so you may see in an upcoming budget revisions, you'll see some of those dollars allocated, and then any carry forward into the next fiscal year, since we do have 2 years. And that's basically all the revisions. Any questions? No? Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have a motion?
I'll move that we approve the budget revisions.
Is there a second?
Second.
Oh, second.
Is there any discussion? Hearing none, Ms. Boggs, will you call for the vote?
Lane,
Aye.
Fleetum,
Aye.
Hart,
Aye.
Watkins,
Aye.
Hobson,
Aye.
and Boggs is an aye.
Motion carried. That brings us to 8H, COVID quarantine protocol. Dr. Wilson?
Mr. President, members of the governing board, I was fortunate to have a conversation last week with the Maricopa County Health Department, Dr. Sunshine, and in reviewing our
Fortunate. Go ahead.
He is a real doctor. He used to be my doctor years ago.
In reviewing our quarantine protocols, Dr. Sunshine recommended that we extend what we currently have to the suggested 10-day quarantine. And the rationale that she used made sense. And so instead of having the quarantine process that we have in place now, which was, remember, 5 days, and if they're test negative, then they can come back, that we move it to 10 days to be more in compliant with Maricopa County Health recommendations.
I'm not sure I understand, when is it 5 days and when is it going to be 10 and when is it 14?
So no longer will there be a 14, and it'll all be 10. So it just shifts from the possibility of a lesser amount. Their concern is that the testing used to justify the lesser amount sometimes isn't reliable. And so in discussions with her, it made sense, quite honestly, that they go to the 10, so that all of the quarantine is 10 days, and there is no longer any 14.
Okay, thank you.
But it's still left up to the parents, correct?
Yes, except for positives.
Any further discussion? Do I have a motion? Well, I move then that we accept the protocol.
Second.
Any further discussion?
Just so I have
Hearing
this, just so I have this correct, we're going from the 5-day, explain
To
it,
the
we had a
10.
5-day, now
So-
we're going to a 10-day?
So, so when you look at the different terminology, there's the discussion all along has been quarantining, right? And quarantining, from my perspective, was encompassing all students. The CDC guideline for quarantining, as described, is different than the implementation that we had. What the CDC would recommend is that quarantine is for students that have been exposed. So that 5-day plus was for exposure. Their description of students that are positive isn't quarantining, it's isolation. So what this recommendation is to say that any student that has tested positive for COVID be required to be absent from school for 10 days from the onset of the symptoms, which is consistent with what we had in place last year after it went from the 14 down to the 10.
So this is for positive tests only.
This is for students that have tested positive only, and
We're
staff.
not, we're not gonna quarantine an entire classroom for 10 days
No,
because some
this
kid
is,
came to
this
school
is
with
just for
COVID.
positive students and positive staff, and it's 10 days from the onset of the symptoms. And so, that means that we're gonna have to do a little bit more tracking of dates and times, but it would be 10 days from the onset of the symptoms, which is what it was last year. But we're not, the quarantining is not a whole class whole, it is just for those who have tested positive.
Okay.
Any further questions or discussion? I believe we did have a motion and a second, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, Ms. Boggs, will you call for the vote?
Lane,
All right.
Leadham,
Aye.
Hart,
Aye.
Watkins,
Aye.
Hobson,
Aye.
Boggs is an aye.
Motion carried. That brings us to item 9, staff report. Dr. Wilson?
Mr. President, members of the governing board, I do not have a lot tonight. Just as a reminder that we're still on track to open the aviation at the end of December, first part of January. The month of November, we're going to have not a groundbreaking, but a ribbon cutting opportunity. So we'll communicate that to you in the near future. They're really fast and furious out on the second building that's out there. We met with Neil and Don and the architects to begin the process of discussing not only what we want to get done here, but also to hone in and refine what we want to build out there for the third building. One of the things that we thought would be helpful is if we A, looked at where our enrollment is, and B, began to do some surveying of some of the community out in that southeast section of the CTED, so we could have a better understanding of what would be of interest to those communities to build out there. So we're hopeful that we're able to come back to you in the next month to 2 months with recommendations for not only the work that needs to be done here, as well as the work that needs to get done out at the Power Campus once the current project is completed, so we can have the third building out there in anticipation of the growth that's coming in that section of the CTED. Other than that, we've had, I think, 6 weeks now of school, and things are going really well, really well. That's all I got.
Thank you. That brings us to 9B, and I believe Kevin Colby, Legal Services, will speak.
Thank you, Mr. Watkins. Last week I had the opportunity to attend the ASBA Law Conference in Scottsdale. I was not part of the general attendees. They have a special CLE track for lawyers, so the sessions that I went to were, they say they're a little more in-depth than what the general public, the general attendees get when they go to these things. Some of them are obviously more informative than others. A couple of good takeaways that will require some policy revisions based on some recent Supreme Court decisions, in particular the Bostock case and the Mahanoy case. So I'll be bringing those to you at the next meeting. Unless somebody has a question. That's all I got.
Thank you. That brings us to agenda item 10, the calendar for the next meeting coming up September 27. Are there any agenda items the board member wishes to add? Hearing none, that brings us to 10B, adjournment. Ms. Boggs, I believe a voice call will do.
Motion to adjourn.
We have a motion. Yeah, we have to have a motion first.
Yeah.
We're lost without Covington.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Or move to adjourn.
A second?
I move to adjourn. Oops.
I'll second.
I will second.
Is there any discussion? Now I believe a voice call would be appropriate.
Can we do an all in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Aye.
Well then, all in favor to adjourn.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.